Welcome to this religious community where we affirm the worth and dignity of all who enter. We gather in community, understanding we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, identity, and theology. Our values invite us to a shared journey of truth and meaning together. Together we foster a spirit of gratitude and generosity so that all may feel welcome and all can thrive. We're glad you're with us this morning. Please enjoy the prelude, Solemn Prelude by Gordon Young, performed by Alan Hoffman on the organ.
I'm Dwight Homer. I'm a member of the worship committee. This morning, we aim in a small way to reconsider what it means to celebrate Memorial Day. This holds special significance now in 2025 as we note, as Americans, the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, the greatest and probably the most horrific of our 20th century wars. While there's probably no way we can change the spirit of this holiday as the launch pad for summer vacations and barbecues, maybe we can engage for an hour with its deeper meaning. Call it a form of commemoration of the many sacrifices of our men and women who served in the military. The stories of those who experienced these conflicts, including members of our church, those who witnessed the killing fields and lived, and those who perished, have too often remained silent. Now please rise as you are willing and able and join us in singing our opening hymn, number 350, The Ceaseless Flow of Endless Time.
The chalice reading this morning is adapted from the words of Christine Robinson. We light this candle of hope as a sign of our search for truth, meaning, and wisdom, in celebration of what we share together in the here and now, and the beauty and complexity of life. Amen, and blessed be. The act of sharing our joys and concerns is an invitation to the community in support and celebration of law and love. Now is the time in our service when we connect with one another by sharing our joys and concerns. Healing thoughts to Jeannie Robertson, who is home recuperating after a recent hospitalization due to pneumonia. Wishing a speedy recovery to Joel Knapp, who's home recovering after recent ankle surgery. Thoughts of compassion and support to our members who are dealing with damage and continued power outage due to the tornado. We hold in our hearts everyone in the wider community who is coping with catastrophic loss at this time. Our deep sympathy to Lisa Ross and Chuck Eby. Lisa's mother, Gloria Ross, peacefully passed away on May 11th, surrounded by her family. As a community, we also share our joys. We hold these concerns with tenderness and compassion. May they be lighter because they are shared. As a community, we also share our joys and celebrations with one another. Gwen and Joel Hickman are delighted to announce the birth of their first grandchild, Haley Nicole, born on May 14th in Wilmington, Delaware. And we have someone who wants us to know that they are eating the first tomato from the vine that they've been babying since February. We lift up these joys with gladness and celebration. May they be magnified because they are shared.
With the many joys and concerns remaining unspoken in our hearts and minds, please join me in the spirit of prayer and mindful attention. This morning's meditation is adopted from a poem by Roland B. Gittleson, We Remember Them. Those people we have lost, our friends, our comrades, our companions in life, we remember them. In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. Under the blue skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we experience joys we yearn to share, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are part of us as we remember them. Amen, and blessed be.
The First Unitarian Church of St. Louis strives to be a welcoming congregation, inspiring lives of loving kindness and integrity by nurturing spirituality, building community, and advancing justice. Your contributions support the mission and ministry of this congregation in the St. Louis region and beyond. This morning's offering will now be received. We will hear Beauty by Frederick Worley, performed by Alan Hoffman on the piano.
For your offerings today and for the service and sacrifices of all who have served our nation in the military, we are most thankful. The title of this expression today is Unspeakable Glory, Memorial Day on the 80th anniversary of VE Day. The original plan for this service involved contributions to the content from Michael Nolan, a Vietnam veteran, and the intent was for us to share the pulpit in our presentation. However, Michael may have misremembered plans that he and Kim had made to vacation in Mexico for the Memorial Day weekend. And so Tom has stepped in very handily and offered to assist with the business of being the worship assistant this morning, which in this case means he gets to present Michael's contribution to you all. As I mentioned, Michael Nolan and I began talking some months ago about how we might collaborate in creating a rather different Memorial Day service in this church community, especially now with the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. We began by reflecting on our very different experiences of our own war in Vietnam, where Michael served and was wounded in action, whereas I resisted, and then eventually I shipped out. More on this later. We also reflected on what we shared as members of the post-war boomer generation. Perhaps more significantly, our fathers both served in World War II, and both tended to remain remarkably taciturn about their experiences in and near some very big battles in that enormous and horrific conflict. Not surprisingly, as kids, we were full of curiosity about what our fathers did in the war. We were repeatedly disappointed and frustrated in this desire because in the end, it was nearly impossible to get our dads to describe in any detail their roles in the war. Other than taking advantage of the GI Bill to buy our first home in Levittown, New York, Dad harbored no interest in participating in veterans affairs, and certainly not with the VFW or the American Legion. In fact, over the 60-plus years of knowing and loving my father, there was only one moment in which he described his combat experience in the war in any graphic detail. This happened just weeks before he passed away at the age of 89. We were visiting my sister for the Christmas holidays at her home in northern New York State, where she lived and where the assisted living and an adjacent nursing facility where my parents lived in their final years was located. We were gathered around the Christmas tree when, almost without introduction, Dad surprised us with an account of his D-Day morning. He'd been aboard a landing craft making its way toward Omaha Beach in Normandy, where they expected to be part of the second wave of the Omaha landing, made famous in the opening battle scenes of the film Saving Private Ryan. Suddenly, perhaps a half mile from the beach, the boat was struck by a German shell which killed the crew in the stern and destroyed the rudder, causing the craft to run in circles at a substantial distance from the beach. After some considerable time, the British Coast Guard were able to secure their landing craft and tow it back to the landing ship tank, the LST, they had originally embarked from. The upshot was that none of them landed in Normandy until the second day of the campaign. Given the carnage and the enormous casualties suffered during that second wave landing, it's unknowable now, of course. But there's every chance that my sister and I are alive today because of that German shell. That story proved to be the only account in any detail about his experiences in battle that we ever heard directly from him. He freely shared a very brief account of his progress in that immensely destructive trip across France and Belgium and into Germany. As he put it, long intervals of muddy and monotonous travel across the European landscape, interrupted by the danger and noise of shell fire. Or his acknowledgement of the snow and bitter cold and more shell fire near Bastogne in the forests of eastern Belgium during the so-called Battle of the Bulge. In any case, for long years after the war, my father remained deeply skeptical of the military and its culture. His service had been marked at first by his exceptional skill as a rifle shot, acquired as a Boy Scout here in St. Louis in the 1920s, and later by his college degree, though most importantly, by his ability to type accurately 100 words a minute. His shooting skills, which showed up during basic training, very nearly sent him to North Africa with a rifle company. However, a serious bout of strep throat kept him from shipping out in early 1943. Instead, Dad was sent with thousands of replacements to Britain and to southern England in advance of the Normandy invasion, and where his MOS, that military occupational specialty, caught up with him, which led to his being assigned to serve as a forward echelon headquarters sergeant. In those days, because of the uncertainty of hand-cranked field radios, and especially in bad European weather, battle orders and unit commands were always conveyed to field commanders in writing. Dad's job became typing and then overseeing the rapid distribution of orders to the battalion company commanders, sometimes from the back of a truck. He served with V Corps, an army group attached to Patton's Third Army, charging across France and Belgium and eventually into Germany and beyond. All Dad ever said about any of this was that he found himself in the middle of the war, spending long days in a Jeep moving just behind Patton's armor or else, and often, in the many improvised command posts where he performed his job of typing and distributing orders. And as they advanced across the northern European landscape, from June through the winter and spring of 1944 and 1945. As I say, he acquired a very large skepticism about the military, as he put it. The Army moved on waves of chicken shit, mixed with tactical details, he used to say, often having deadly serious strategic consequences. Much later, in conversations with some of my high school and college friends who were veterans with combat experience in Vietnam, I learned that they too, with very few exceptions, rarely wanted to relive and share any details about combat in that place. The uglier the chaos, the less they had to say, confining themselves to a few facts that constitute the record.
As Dwight said, I am not Mike Nolan, but I sometimes play him in church. And these are very big shoes to fill, by the way, given what Mike had to say. For Mike Nolan, his service was a matter of dealing with limited choices and performing one's duty as required. He took whatever jobs his qualifications led them to and served as honorably as he could. With the draft, it was mostly the dumb luck of timing and eventually the lottery. For Michael, who finished college in 1966 and well before the coming of the lottery, his deferment was over, and growing demand for healthy bodies with brains meant that the draft went into the government's version of high gear. His education qualified him to train as a medic, where he was rushed through the military's equivalent of nursing school. Once trained to perform basic triage on sometimes badly injured personnel, Michael related that, quote, I found myself serving on a medevac helicopter, what the GIs called a dust-off chopper. In that capacity, I spent most of my war in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, first attached to the Army's 101st Airborne Division and then to the 4th Infantry Division. I tried as well as I could, keeping the wounded alive long enough on the helicopter to reach a field hospital. I believed that I had a duty to my patients, my fellow soldiers, and myself. It wasn't all about bravery. Hell, there wasn't time to think about anything but the job in front of you that needed doing badly and right away. Statistics, this is not a quote from Michael, statistics that emerged from the more than 13 years of the Vietnam War studied the real risk that these helicopter crews were exposed to. Not to say that the challenges of managing wounds and administering first-line care, flying at treetop heights above the Southeast Asian rainforest, were not enough to think about in terms of these statistics. How you can compile these statistics is amazing, but the Army does that. One could question how anyone measures life expectancy in combat conditions such as variable landscape, but somehow in the late 60s, early 70s, the so-called life expectancy of medevac crews during a firefight was calculated at roughly 19 minutes. Not sure how anyone goes to work under such conditions. Michael noted, and this is a quote, "What you don't know might just kill you. After all, war is hell, and the only rejoinder I can conceivably think of is no shit." And that is a quote. After he left Vietnam, and possibly as a consequences of his experiences, and perhaps the gnarly politics of the Nixon years, Michael became active in Vietnam Veterans Against the War, an organization founded by veteran and future Senator John Kerry. Thank you.
In my case, my college years began in 1966, the same year as Michael's college graduation. As it was in '67, I began attending anti-war demonstrations, first in Columbus, Ohio, and later in St. Louis, especially after the Kent State shootings in May 1970. That event led to widespread student strikes at colleges across the nation, and which for me had the effect of postponing my graduation. By 1971, my student deferment was exhausted, and with a relatively low number in the lottery. What helped me to escape military service proved to be fortuitous and almost entirely accidental. After roughly a year of driving a yellow cab in St. Louis, I was given the chance through a friend of my father's, the port captain of the Maritime Department of Mobil Oil Corporation, to accept a job offer to serve as a deckhand on one of their oil tankers. This enabled me to obtain a Coast Guard ID, the so-called Z card, as an ordinary seaman on Mobil's the SS Eclipse. This lowest rank in the merchant marine itself offered no draft deferment protections. However, sailing to offshore destinations with our cargoes of gasoline and fuel oils, oddly enough, did. It turned out that in spite of not being part of the armed forces, American tanker crews in particular are automatically subjected to a special obligation to serve the United States as merchant sailors for the duration of any conflict involving the United States prior to returning to American waters. Since the Vietnam War was still more or less raging in late 1972, we were required to sign special service articles to document that possible eventuality. As it happened, after one or two of our usual trips to Texas and New England, we were called on to pick up a cargo of jet fuel at a refinery in the British West Indies, technically a foreign port, and this turned out would keep me away from the draft. Interestingly, in 1972, there were still a few able seamen working for the company who had sailed on tankers during World War II and were similarly required to serve for the duration of that war. This put them on ships attached to convoys containing much-needed fuel to our allies. As it happened, one of my watch partners on the 12 to 4 watch, a quiet, amiable fellow nicknamed Red for what had once been his very red hair, was said to have been torpedoed twice in the early 40s aboard ships that had been among the hundreds of convoys hauling gasoline and diesel fuel to Britain and Russia during the long Battle of the Atlantic. Red never mentioned the matter, not once. What was truly amazing, though, to me anyway, was that given that these men endured as civilian crew members who suffered the worst outcomes of naval combat short of being killed, was that none of them ever received a dime in veterans' benefits after the war. In '72, Vietnam was still underway, and there were still ships in Mobil's fleet delivering fuel to bases on the coast of South Vietnam, and the old rules still applied whenever we were assigned to offshore operations. As it happened, we stayed in the Atlantic region, never making it to the Pacific, let alone Vietnam. Nevertheless, our trips to Venezuela, Mexico, and the West Indies had the effect of keeping me off the list of the draft eligible for over a year, which turned out to be just long enough.
Accidents of fate notwithstanding, we have the sense that our fathers and our friends' silence about their wars was never mere discretion. With they and most of those we've known who've had combat experience who seldom speak of it because of the facts that are known are that the horrors of war are indeed horrible and largely unspeakable. The fear and violence and the brute ugliness of combat are painful to remember and even more difficult to talk about. Which leads us to share Michael's sense of Memorial Day with you today. For me, he writes, Memorial Day is a day when attention should be given to all those 19-year-old boys with rifles who died in the jungles and killing fields of Southeast Asia, over 59,000 of them. Mostly with honor and simply by doing their jobs they were given. All had to face their limited choices, like me. I had a great good fortune to survive. Let us remember to dedicate this day to all the too many who didn't.
Our closing hymn is 412, Let Hope and Sorrow Now Unite. Please rise as you are able and join in singing that hymn. But just before, let me say that, where's it? But that last hymn, the hope and sorrow now unite, to enable us to remember more touchingly and thoroughly the sacrifices that have been made by the many for us. Thank you. And amen. And blessed be. Thank you.
Please stay for the post salute by Alan, and afterwards, turn and greet your neighbor.
actually really cool hearing the second verse like come in. Sorry about that, everyone. Can everybody come